since February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel jointly launched a military strike against Iran. The geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East have been escalating. This seemingly military confrontation centered around the nuclear issue, and regional hegemony actually directly targets the oil-dollar system that has sustained the global financial order for half a century. As the core pillar of the U.S. dollar hegemony, the operation logic of the oil-dollar system is not simply oil price in dollars, but military deterrence, security guarantee, oil-dollar settlement, capital flowing back to the United States, consolidation of U.S. dollar hegemony. And this U.S.-Israel war against Iran is tearing apart this mature system from 4 dimensions: energy channels, trust among allies, settlement rules, and capital flow. It is pushing the global energy and financial landscape into an irreversible reconstruction cycle. The underlying logic of petrodollars. The United States uses its hegemony to control the global energy lifeline. In the 1970s, after the Bretton Woods system collapsed and the U.S. dollar was decoupled from gold, the United States quickly reached a secret agreement with Saudi Arabia to establish the petroleum dollar order. Global oil trade must be priced and settled in U.S. dollars. The huge surplus of oil dollars from the Middle East would flow back to the United States, where they would be used to purchase U.S. bonds, stocks, and U.S. assets. In return, the United States provided military protection and weapons supplies to the oil-producing countries, maintaining regional balance of power. This system then spread to the entire OPEC and became the core anchor point for the dominance of the U.S. dollar worldwide. The key value of the petroleum dollar lies in allowing the United States to hold the financial in global energy trade. On the one hand, countries must hoard U.S. dollars to secure their oil imports, strengthening the status of the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. On the other hand, the capital inflow from oil-producing countries supports the U.S. fiscal deficit and lowers financing costs, creating the privilege of printing money for energy. The core of maintaining this system is the U.S.'s military control over the energy-producing regions in the Middle East and the absolute obedience of allies to the rules of the U.S. dollar settlement. Impact of the conflict. How the U.S.-Israeli actions have shaken the foundation of the oil-dollar system. 1. The control of the Strait of Hormuz has been lost, and the hegemony of the energy passage has been disrupted. The Strait of Hormuz, as the oil gateway of the world, carries 20% to 30% of the maritime oil trade and serves as the physical hub of the oil-dollar system. The United States has long controlled the passage rights of the strait to ensure the smooth and stable demand for U.S. dollars in the oil trade. However, after the outbreak of this war, Iran quickly retaliated and imposed control over the passage of the strait, directly targeting the weak point of the U.S.'s energy hegemony. The obstruction of the passage of the strait directly triggered global panic in crude oil supply, and Brent crude oil soared to $119 per barrel at one point. The geopolitical risk premium has become long-term. More importantly, the United States failed to quickly calm the situation and restore stability in the strait, breaking the perception of the outside world that it is the safety guardian of the Middle East. When the United States cannot guarantee the security of the core energy passage, the reliance of oil-producing countries and energy-importing countries on the U.S. dollar system begins to loosen. The trust among allies has collapsed, and the oil-producing countries in the Middle East are accelerating their dependency. The survival of the petrodollar system is highly dependent on the security for dollar alliance between the United States and the oil-producing countries in the Gulf. However, this time, the U.S. unilaterally launched the war against Iraq without fully considering the interests of the Middle East allies such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. This even forced the allies to choose sides, completely shattering the trust of Middle Eastern countries in the U.S.'s security commitment. The core oil-producing countries, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have all maintained neutrality, refused to provide support for the U.S. military to attack the bases, and at the same time accelerated the multi-currency settlement of energy trade. Previously, the U.S.-Saudi petrodollar agreement expired without renewal. Saudi Arabia has clearly pushed for the use of multiple currencies, such as the Chinese yuan and the euro, for oil trade settlement. The United Arab Emirates, on the other hand, continue to maintain economic and trade relations with Iran, weakening the binding effect of the U.S. dollar settlement. The former core allies of the petrodollar system now all seek strategic autonomy, making the single dollar-based accounting rules dominated by the United States lose the most important support. 3. The process of de-dollarization has accelerated, and non-dollar settlement channels have been quickly implemented. Facing long-term sanctions from the United States and this military pressure, Iran has already established a mature de-dollarization system. The ongoing conflict has further compelled this system to be implemented on a larger scale, creating a demonstration effect. In Iran's oil trade with China and Russia, the proportion of settlement in RMB and rubles has significantly increased. The proportion of RMB settlement in China's oil trade has exceeded 60%. At the same time, oil for goods exchanges, gold settlements, and cross-border digital currency payments have been promoted, completely bypassing the SWIFT dollar settlement system. This model is no longer Iran's single battle, but has attracted more and more countries to follow suit. Global central banks have continuously reduced their holdings of U.S. bonds and increased their holdings of gold. Emerging market countries are accelerating the establishment of their own currency settlement alliances. Oil trade is no longer the exclusive domain of the U.S. dollar. The United States' attempt to suppress de-dollarization through military means has instead made non-dollar settlements a risk avoidance choice for more countries, accelerating the marginalization of the petrodollar. For capital flow disruption, failure of the U.S. dollar financial loop. The core loop of the petrodollar system involves oil-producing countries repatriating their dollar surpluses to the United States. This repatriation supports U.S. debt and the financial market. However, the war has led to disruptions in oil exports from Middle Eastern oil-producing countries, a sharp decline in dollar income, and a decrease in trust in U.S. assets. As a result, a large number of Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds have begun to reduce their holdings of U.S. debt and stocks, and instead shifted to safe haven assets such as gold, the Chinese yuan, and the euro. At the same time, the massive consumption caused by the war has increased the fiscal pressure on the United States. Daily military expenditures exceed $1 billion US, further increasing the size of the U.S. debt. The concerns of overseas capital regarding U.S. dollar assets have intensified. Although short-term demand for safe haven assets briefly supported the U.S. dollar, the long-term trend of capital outflows has already emerged. The core cycle of settlement, repatriation in the petrodollar system has been completely broken. System transformation, the petroleum dollar system moving towards gradual reconfiguration. It's essential to recognize that the petroleum dollar system will not collapse instantly due to a war. The share of the U.S. dollar in global reserves, payments, and foreign exchange transactions remains dominant, and its network effect and institutional inertia are difficult to be replaced in the short term. However, this U.S.-Israeli war against Iran has completely ended the unilateral monopoly era of the petroleum dollar, promoting the transformation of the global energy financial landscape towards multipolarity and diversification. On one hand, the United States will still rely on its military and financial advantages to strive to maintain the core position of the U.S. dollar in the petroleum trade. On the other hand, the strategic autonomy of oil-producing countries, the exploration of de-dollarization by emerging markets, and the weakening of reliance on petroleum by the new energy revolution will continue to compress the survival space of the petroleum dollar. In the future, global petroleum trade will present a pattern where multiple currencies such as the US dollar, the Chinese yuan, the euro, and digital currencies coexist. The era of a single currency dominating energy trade will come to an end. The paradox of hegemony. The stronger it is, the more it declines the original intention of the United States and Israel in launching the war against Iran was to suppress the trend of de-dollarization through military intimidation and consolidate the hegemony of the petrodollar system. However, this conflict precisely demonstrates the paradox of hegemony. The more they try to maintain the old order through violent means, the more they accelerate the collapse of the old order. The war between the United States and Israel against Iran did not strengthen the petrodollar system. Instead, it made the world realize the fragility of the dollar system and the unsustainability of hegemony. The reconstruction of the global energy and financial order has already begun. This is not the victory of a single country, but the inevitable result of the international landscape moving towards multipolarity.